I guess I always just assumed because this is how I would use Kickstarter. And of course, it's easy to fall into that trick of everybody else is using something the way I'm using it. But I only ever go to Kickstarter if I hear somebody that I already like announce they have a Kickstarter. And then I'll go look and say, oh, yeah, that looks good. I'm going to fund that. But I would never go to Kickstarter just to like poke around. Hello, fellow creative voyagers. This week on the Indie Author Podcast, I talk with Megan Haskell and Jennifer Hilt about the good, the bad, and the surprising of Kickstarter. They offer their insider perspectives covering both fiction and nonfiction books, including how Kickstarter enables authors to tap into a growing desire among readers for access to creators, which comes first, a Kickstarter campaign or a reader community, how Kickstarter has become a platform where readers browse for books, the importance of starting small, the value of a campaign as market research, which parts of the campaign were harder or easier than they expected, and the importance of not just adding a Kickstarter campaign on top of your existing schedule and of building in rest time. And now let's hear from Megan Haskell and Jennifer Hilt about the good, the bad, and the confusing of Kickstarter. Hello, and welcome to the Indie Author Podcast. Today, my guests are Jennifer Hilt and Megan Haskell. Hey, how are you guys doing?
Good. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Yes, I'm very happy to have you here. One of my few multi-guest podcast episodes. So this is a special acknowledgement for you guys. Yes. To give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Jennifer Hilt is the author of the Trope Thesaurus series, including Trope Your Way to a Stronger Story and books on horror and romance tropes. She's also the USA Today bestselling author of 24 books across 4 pen names. And Jennifer is also my co-host on the Minding the Movies with Trope Talk video series that you will find at the Indie Author YouTube channel. And Megan Haskell is the award-winning author of the Sanyeri Chronicles, the epic fantasy Forged in Shadow, and a women's contemporary fantasy series starting with Aetherbound. And she and Greta Boris are the forces behind the author wheel. So as soon as you've caught up with the Indie Author Podcast, please go over and subscribe to the Author Wheel Podcast, which is a wonderful podcast.
Oh, thank you.
And I invited Jennifer and Megan on the podcast to talk about Kickstarter because Kickstarter is just in the news so much. And I thought this would be a good combination because we have someone who has had success with a nonfiction Kickstarter, Jen, and we've had someone who has success with a fiction Kickstarter, Megan, and then we have someone who has no experience with Kickstarter whatsoever, me. So we figured that we would bring a combination of perspectives to this, and Jen and Megan have also promised to share not just the glory moments of their Kickstarter, but also maybe some of the more challenging moments as well. So I thought it would be useful to start out and ask each of you to just give a quick description to provide some context of what the focus of your Kickstarter was. So Jen, let's start with you. What was the focus of your Kickstarter?
Before that, can I just for a minute kind of define what I think Kickstarter means? Because I didn't know that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, please.
Here who doesn't get it. And Megan, chime in with, whatever you think. But Kickstarter is a way of what we call like direct sales, and you're interacting with your readers. And it's similar to GoFundMe and that an idea, except Kickstarter is only for creative projects. So that's just kind of like the basics of which I didn't even really understand when I first was like, what is a Kickstarter thing? So it's kind of give you a rundown of what that is. So you can only use it for creative projects. And then we'll go into all the details about that. So my Kickstarter, the reason why I was interested in it is I sell nonfiction. My nonfiction books are obviously about tropes, and I've been using those wide. And I was seeing that there were people who are doing like Skye Warren and Brian Cohn and Russell Nolte and all these people who are doing Kickstarters with their nonfiction books and having success with that. And I was like, I know zero about this, like probably even less than zero if that's possible. So I was like wondering if that would be something that would work for me. And so that was kind of how I got my entree of I just kind of plunged into, I had a book that was my Trope Thesaurus romance, my second book that I hadn't put out on Amazon or Wide or anything like that. And I had a pretty good draft of it. It wasn't completely done, but I had a pretty good draft. And I thought, well, what if I use that for a Kickstarter? That was pretty much all I thought with it. And I kind of went into it pretty naive, I would say. And Megan and I can talk more about that. But that was kind of like my entree into doing it was like, I have this product. I see other people who are having success with it. Let me give it a go and see what happens.
And Megan, how about you? Give us a little background on your Kickstarter.
Sure. So I actually have done two so far. One was nonfiction, which was actually our first nonfiction it was for the author wheel. We did a Kickstarter for our Foundations of Great Storytelling, preparing to write. And that one was reasonably successful as well. And then I did my fiction one, which was kind of me putting my toes in the water because like Jennifer, I didn't quite know what I was doing and figuring things out. It's like I wanted to test something that I already knew how to do. So I did a paperback Kickstarter for the second book in the Rise of Lilith series. So it was Aether Crossed. And again, like Jennifer, it was successful. I fully funded within like a couple hours and, exceeded my goals. So I was really excited about it as a way to kind of put my toe in the water and get going. And now I'm actually just about to launch my second fiction Kickstarter, which will be for a special edition hardcover of my debut novel, which is Senyari the Last Descendant. So for the Senyari Chronicles. So I think that's my big tip of the day is to kind of go slow, put your toe in the water and build from there. So that's my 2 cents on my Kickstarters that I had.
And just to hit some of the sort of technical details of Kickstarter, can you just describe briefly what you mean by fully funded within a certain amount of time?
Of course. Okay, so the way Kickstarter works is that you set up your sales page, your campaign page, and you can set up your different tiers for the different rewards that your backers can opt in and support you at, right? So you set that up and then you hit launch and you can choose how long your campaign is and you can choose how much funding you need to make it happen. So for my campaign, for my paperback fiction campaign, I set my funding goal at $500, which would basically cover, the print costs and shipping costs of the books and give me a little boost for the launch of the book. Now, the nice thing is, of course, then you can go on and launch elsewhere afterwards. But for the purposes of the Kickstarter, I set a pretty small goal, again, because I was putting my toe in the water and because I just really wanted to fund those costs. So then you set your time period. So for me, I think mine was a 21-day campaign, which meant I had 3 weeks to convince enough people to back me to achieve that funding goal. So I managed to do that. I got that $500 in a couple hours, which was fabulous, right? So that let me know that I was going to meet that minimum goal and I was going to be able to fund the print of the paperbacks and all of the costs that were associated with it. If you don't fund on Kickstarter, so if you don't meet that goal, you don't get enough backers to meet your goal, the campaign doesn't fund. I hate to use this word, but it fails. I mean,
sometimes it's just the right word to use.
Right? I don't like looking at it as failure, but it fails. And so none of the backers get charged and you are not required to complete that Kickstarter. So for example, there are Kickstarters out there. A good example is like a board game, right? They set usually high funding goals because they have bigger costs than we do as authors for books. So if they don't hit that, call it $100,000 funding goal, they don't have to make the game at all. They don't owe it to anyone. But if they do hit that funding goal, they have to fulfill it for their backers. So it's really important to set your funding goal at a level that is achievable, but covers your costs so that if you are forced to go for it, if you fund, that you can actually afford to make the product.
I'm curious to ask both of you, what were your own author business goals when you decided to pursue it? And Jennifer, you had talked about that a little bit, but did you have very specific goals in mind, like what you wanted to achieve? You wanted to fund something, or you wanted to expand your reach, or you wanted to get, more visibility or anything like that? Any additional goals you had there?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to expand my reach and find other readers / community because it seems like often the people who are supporting Kickstarters are not exactly the same people you're going to find on the other channels. So it's really a way to give you more audience. So that was kind of the thing that I was interested in because like Megan said, when you're finished with your Kickstarter project, usually there's people usually wait a minimum of 3 months, authors, before they put up the product for sale on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and other vendors. So a lot of times then it's so you're selling the same product twice to two different groups of people, I guess. So that was obviously very appealing as an author because, we don't get that a whole lot. That said, there's a lot of work involved in doing that. And like the things that Megan talked about, like setting up your page and setting up your campaign. The first time I did it, I would say that all that took me a month. And I'm not a particularly techie person. Probably that's not a surprise, but like just figuring out what everything meant took me a lot of time to figure out like, oh, what rewards really mean, what like all these different, what a tier is, how that works with some, kind of, and then like just working out the pages themselves to make them look attractive and those kind of things. So for me, like all that was a really big part of the learning process that I was glad I did, but it definitely takes time and energy to do it. It's not like, I would not say this is a like set it and forget it thing in any kind of way. And, it's just important for people to know that. Like I wanted to look for more of an audience and I definitely had that opportunity, but it also took a lot of time and energy to like learn how to do that search. So that was really my biggest things were because one of the things that was really nice about it is because the Kickstarter people are often other creative people, they really tend to want to sign up for your mailing lists. I mean, we're always trying to like improve our mailing list. So that was like a really great benefit that I found as I gained a whole bunch more newsletter subscribers. So things like that were kind of like more almost long-term goals. But the initial thing was just to broaden my reach and learn a little bit more about ways to sell direct besides what I had been doing.
And Megan, how about you? Were there other goals beyond what you've mentioned so far that you had for your campaign?
No. So I think for me, it was, like Jennifer said, it was reaching a new audience. The interesting thing, and I feel like we're in this moment of transition within the author community and reader community for that matter, where there are huge differences between the readers that are in Kindle Unlimited, for example, who just want to read as many books as they possibly can. And maybe they find favorites and they become this other kind of reader, but they start out there at least. And then the readers who are interested in, having a physical copy of something, of supporting an author directly, that kind of sustainability of the creative industry. There are readers out there who are strongly in favor of that and in favor of reaching those authors and having access to more, to the creative process within, for that author. So I'm not saying like you need to go out and have coffee with them. I'm saying that like just being able to.
That's a really premium.
That would be huge.
That would be a really premium deliverable to give them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But one of the premium tiers that I did offer on mine was a one-on-one coffee on Zoom, right? So I didn't go out and meet them in person, but on Zoom. And it was a very high tier. It was a very high cost item. And there were a few other things involved with it as well, including the books, obviously. But I did have a few backers who were like, yeah, I'm going to spend, a couple $100 so I can sit and chat with you because I just really think, it's so cool to have access to an author and talk about the creative process and how we came up with the story idea and that kind of thing. So it's a different audience. And for me personally, that's the direction that I have wanted to go or wanted to pursue, is that more community-based, experience-based group of readers rather than the, as many books as fast as possible reader community. So that's just kind of a personal strategy decision for myself. It feels right for me. It's my kind of business that I want to run. But I know that there are plenty of authors out there who are like, no, I just want to write and I can write fast and I want to put out a lot of books and I want to make sure my readers have, that bingeable quality. And that's totally cool. It's just a very different mindset and a very different type of reader. So yeah, so for me, it was largely starting to try to tap into that community. And then also that first campaign, the paperback campaign, I knew it wasn't going to be as big ticket seller as like the really super high edition, luxury hardbacks. But it was my way of being like, is this even really feasible for me? I know how to make a paperback already. So, okay, let's do that and see if we can start to figure out what this community, what this Kickstarter thing really is and how much work does go into it, because it is a lot.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be delving into that. And I wanted to share a story that I think I heard at 20 Books, but I remember someone talking about the fact that someone did something like a Kickstarter, and one of their tiers was, and this was like a multi-$1,000 tier, that the author would fly to the contributor's hometown, meet them at the airport, have lunch with them, and hand them a signed book. And he got like two people who were willing to spend, I don't know, $10,000 a piece or something like that for him to fly to their airport and hand them the book. But it was really just a great example of, like, almost literally the sky's the limit if you have the kind of community you can tap into, which
Yeah.
was my next question, which is that it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, because you want, like, I think both of you are talking about the idea of building up more of a community using the Kickstarter, but you kind of have to have a community that wants to interact with you in that way to start with. Like, I do kind of sense that a certain amount of the Kickstarter activity is Kickstarters supporting each other. So I think especially in the author community, like, I just sense there's this community of Kickstarter using authors, and they're very generous about supporting each other's Kickstarters. But among your reader base, it has to be seeded with people who want to, or maybe already are interacting with you in that way. So Jennifer, can you just talk a little bit about that? Like, which comes first, the seed of that kind of community, or can that come as a result of the Kickstarter?
Yeah. I think one thing that I keep learning and I keep forgetting that I keep relearning is that there's so many people out there. And I feel like sometimes, especially when we are like in our author communities, we feel like there's only a finite number of people that are interested in our work, and a finite, and that probably is true. There's also just so many people out there. And I feel like Kickstarter has shown me a window into just how many other people out there that I didn't even know who could be potentially interested in my work, or who only heard about it from that. And so I think that's, like I said, I keep learning it and kind of keep forgetting it. But I think I don't understand exactly how or how there are so many people on Kickstarter, but there are a lot of people there. And so the biggest challenge, I think, when you put something up there is gaining that visibility for them to see you. And so that's the kind of thing that kind of it becomes more popular we're trying to do. And so they have this little sticker that if your project funds in a certain number of time, you get like a projects we love thing. And then you kind of get a little more visibility. But in general, I just think there's just a whole lot of people out there who want to read and are interested in different ideas. And, like when so I did 2 campaigns in the second one. Either time I have done very little promo, like pre-order, put a lot of pre-order. Just because it's taken me so long to set it all up, I don't do like weeks or months of that. I just kind of tend to be like, okay, guess what? This is coming out in 3 days. The campaign's going to start. And it's been really interesting to me that like immediately I see people backing it who I don't know any of these people. They're not authors. I don't recognize any of the names. And like the one that I did that like opened early in the night, there were like already people who are looking at it. So it was just kind of, there are just a lot of people who are on their computers, looking around, seeing what's out there. And I think so that's kind of a good thing for us to remember, because it can feel like, are we all just in the same tiny little pool? And I think it's actually a much bigger pool than we think.
Yeah, I guess I always just assume, because this is how I would use Kickstarter. And of course, it's easy to fall into that trick of everybody else is using something the way I'm using it. But I only ever go to Kickstarter if I hear somebody that I already like announce they have a Kickstarter, and then I'll go look and say, oh yeah, that looks good, I'm going to fund that. But I would never go to Kickstarter just to like poke around.
Right. But I think
don't
there
know.
are that do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
evidently.
Yeah.
Megan, what are your thoughts about that?
Yes, I agree. I think that there are people that Kickstarter has become the primary way that they shop for books. They want, especially I think book collectors who want that physical copy in their hands. I think there are people, that's how they do it. They like the system. They like interacting with the authors directly. They like having that physical, gorgeous, product in their hands. So I think and that's what I'm saying. Like, it's a completely different audience than the people that are in, just reading ebooks online and are used to that. So I think there's that aspect to it. I would say, as far as the chicken and the egg, I think it's both. I think you need both. So if you've up to this point been primarily or exclusively online with Amazon, especially if you're exclusive with Amazon, but even just even if you're wide, if you're across all the ebook platforms, if you've been mostly digital, your audience is therefore going to be mostly digital. They're going to be the ones that have subscribed to your list. Now, some of those people will be super fans or want that physical, beautiful collector's edition because they love your work. But as a percentage, it's hard to say what that percentage is going to be. It will fund some, but it's probably not going to be everything. Meanwhile, now you've got this Kickstarter page, and especially I think after your first campaign, and we'll see how this works out for my second campaign. So Jennifer, you might be able to speak to this a little bit more, but it starts to snowball because all the people that backed your first campaign, you can now message them and say, hey, I've got a new campaign up. I've got a new book, or I've got, this special edition. And so people now, they do already know you. They're already in the system. And so I think that there's more momentum there. So on that first campaign, again, this is why I think my personal belief, and I have not done enough Kickstarters to prove this out yet, but my personal belief is that you put your toe in the water. You start small, easy funding goals, something you already know how to do, something that's digital Kickstarter, they like physical products. So you still should do a physical product of some kind, but start small. Don't have massive goals for your first Kickstarter. We're not going to be Brandon Sanderson. Sorry. Not going to happen.
Yeah.
I know that's hard for people to remember. But start small and be willing to learn, be willing to grow over time in that patience. And I think the audience from both sides will help your campaigns over time.
I'd be interested in hearing from both of you about how your Kickstarter experience differed from what you expected. Like, what were your biggest surprises as you went through the process? And Jennifer, let's start with you on that one.
Biggest surprises. Let's see. I would say overwhelmingly, backers have been lovely. Like, if you have some worry about like, oh, I'm going to get some, no, people have just been great. I've really enjoyed interacting with them. They've been nice. They've been enthusiastic. They're understanding. They're just been great. The management of how you deliver this stuff is a whole other thing and a very real part of it. And so kind of the data management part of, I feel like a Kickstarter campaign is kind of basically three things for me. One, a product that you create. Two, the Kickstarter campaign itself that we were talking about that you're trying to get funded. And then three, what they call fulfillment of how you actually get all those things that you promise people to them. And so those are, in my mind, pretty much three distinct things that I have to do. And the fulfillment part takes a lot of time and energy from me as I'm learning how to do it. And there's not just you can use Kickstarter to do it, but there's other platforms that can help you do it. And one of them that I use is called BackerKit, and they do it for a fee, but it helps you manage all the people, like the email addresses and the physical addresses and who gets what, because it can get, as you get a whole bunch of tiers, it can get very confusing very quickly of who is getting what. So learning how to do all that has been something that's taken a lot of time and energy. And I feel like, oh, I'm really understanding it the second time. But the first time that I did it, I was like very pulling my hair out, like, what am I doing? How does this work? And it was very intense for me to figure all that stuff out. So I think it's just kind of like everything else. You don't know until you do it. And I wouldn't have thought there would be so much like data management involved, which is probably incredibly naive on my part, but there it is.
I'm curious as to how much of the backer data you get. Do you get email addresses and you must get like mailing address. You must get all that because you need it to fulfill. And are there any restrictions on how you can use that? Like, I would imagine that you should be able to funnel all the email addresses into your email subscription list.
No, you cannot do that unless you ask. Okay. I can communicate with them, no problem, through Kickstarter or BackerKit about their order. But if I want to send them an email privately, or if I want to send them my newsletter, there's a way that you ask them in something called a survey at the end of your campaign, and a little question that says, hey, do you want to be on my mailing list? And overwhelmingly, that community says yes, which is why Megan and I are talking about, it's a great way to grow your email list. But you absolutely 100% cannot just take and download all of these emails that you have and put them on your list, which just, it's good to realize that, because it does create confusion, because people will be like, why are you asking for my email? Because yes, we have been communicating using your email, but it's just, You know how life is. You got to like check all the little boxes. But you can't, after the campaign ends, you can't like hold on to all that material unless they have given you permission to keep their email. So you don't have access to like their, mailing address and stuff like that afterwards. So that's their security thing.
Yep. Makes sense.
Yeah. And they don't give you any of that information until your Kickstarter funds and closes, by the way, too. So if you're like during the campaign, other than sending what they call backer updates, which are within Kickstarter, and it's like it's like a message through Kickstarter to your backers or people who are following your campaign. So you can do that, but you don't actually see who those backers are until after the campaign closes and is funded. And then you can move them over to BackerKit, or there's another one called Pledgebox. There are a few different companies, like Jennifer was saying. So that's when you get that information. And on all the sites, they have this big thing that you have to check the boxes that say, I understand, I will not copy, save, or distribute this email list. I understand this is their privacy, laws and all that stuff. So that is kind of an important consideration as well. But for people who are like concerned about being backers, that's what you can tell them, is that you don't, other than what you need to do to fulfill the Kickstarter, you have no access to their information and are not keeping it or saving it anywhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Megan, I want to give you a chance to answer the question about what was the biggest surprise for you as you ran your Kickstarter campaign?
So again, kind of going back to this is an ongoing learning process, right? So I thought for my fiction campaign, because my series has the protagonist is a bartender, and I created, with the help of a bartender friend of mine, I created cocktail menus for each of the books. And so I thought, as like an upper tier, like add-on, people would love to have an online Zoom cocktail class with my friend who teaches online Zoom cocktail classes, right? It was just such a no-brainer. Like, why would you not do that? I wasn't, nobody backed it. Except nobody backed it except for the couple people who bought in at the highest tier because they wanted the one-on-one. And honestly, they didn't really care that much about the cocktail class, but nobody else backed it. So I was like, oh, well, fun fact of the day, readers like to read and not attend a cocktail class. So sometimes I actually think Kickstarter can be another great way, like live events, to really start to understand who your audience is and what they really want, as well as obviously, interacting with them more personally and so forth, like we've talked about. But that was a big aha moment that like, oh no, that didn't fit. It wasn't what the readers wanted. So taking that information moving forward, I will not be offering cocktail class. Sure.
Well, we've mentioned
something else
sort of in passing what you were offering as different tiers. And Megan, can you just go through what your different tiers were in one of your Kickstarters and what the financial commitment was from a backer for each of them?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I have to go think it through. I don't have it up. But so the base level was just to support this project. So I think I had for $3 or something like that, you could just support the project. And I had a couple digital downloads, like coloring pages, that I offered for that one. Then I had the digital only or ebook only tier. So that was just for the ebook of Aether Crossed. And again, I kept the same lower tier items as well. So it still had the coloring page, I had a computer wallpaper, I think too, but digital downloads, right? So that one I think was $10. Then I had the 2-book series in digital. It might've been like $15 for that one or something. So that was on my digital only tiers. And then I had the paperbacks. So that was my first physical tier where I actually had to ship stuff out. And so with the paperback, you also got a bookmark and it was signed by me. And then I think I charged 20 or 25, maybe 25 because it included shipping. That's what it was. And that's another key. Shipping is tough. And I'm still, for my next campaign, I want to figure out international shipping, which Jennifer, I don't know if you've done international shipping.
No,
I may have to kick your butt.
because now I'd like to figure it out too, because people like all the time and I'm all like, I'm afraid.
Yeah. International shipping is tough. But for US shipping, I included that in all the tiers so that it was all wrapped up in a single price. Then I had the 2-book paperback tier, since it was the second book in the series. And then I had started adding on the VIP tiers or the experience tier. That's what it was. So at that tier, and I don't remember how much I charged, but it was expensive. It was an expensive high ticket item, but it was a cocktail class. It was a group Ask Me Anything on Zoom meeting. And it was, of course, all the digital books, and then you could do the physical VIP tier, which had all the physical books, as well as all the digital stuff, as well as all the classes. And then I had the super extra VIP experience, which included the one-on-one. So yeah. And I want to say that one was like $350
Okay.
at the full price. I think I offered a discount like at the beginning of the campaign to try to get people in there. And then after a week or something, I think the full price was $350, I want to say.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was how I broke that one up. Now, I think for the hardback edition that I'm about to do, I'm going to try and keep it a little simpler because it was a lot to manage on the back end as far as understanding which backers were in which tiers and what they got and making sure they all got the things that they were supposed to get and all that stuff. So I think I am going to try and simplify it a little bit, but we'll see. Sometimes my ideas run away with me.
And Jennifer, how about you? What were some of the things you offered at different backer rates?
Yeah. Similar to Megan, the same thing of like $10 was the ebook. I had like the $1, like a $1 PDF. $10 was the ebook. And like, I think $30 was the paperback. So when you get the paperback though, you get the ebook and you get like everything below it. Yeah. So it all kind of nests. And then the backer kit, the users are used to that. So that's not really something that you have to explain. They have it's pretty laid out. So that kind of makes sense. I simplified for my second one because it really seemed like people are just basically interested in books and classes and then doing like some more like one-on-one things. So those are the kind of things I offered. The neat thing about this is that in addition to the things that you're actually offering, like we're talking about for the tiers and things, there's also things that are called add-ons. And that's how people who have like a really good backlist. So like Megan's fans per se, they can like, when she's offering those things, then they can go back and I can get like all copies of her books that she has. I can also get those also, even if they're not in a tier. So you're like at, a different way of adding. I think the one thing that I really learned that I think is important that sometimes gets lost is I think if you have a really good product, you don't have to knock yourself out with lots of bells and whistles. So I think it's okay to not offer 9 million other things, to have a good thing and some various versions of it can appeal to people at different price points, but you don't have to do all the things. And I think that I've seen that has helped, work for me, but I also see other campaigns where that's working too. If people like it, they're going to like it. You don't have to like entice them with a whole bunch of other extraneous elements.
Well, I'm curious about how you balance the price you're charging or the price you're asking for a backer for a product, and then what you eventually want to sell it when you get to the point where you can put it up on retail platforms.
I don't actually think like that was an early kind of mental mistake I had where I was kind of like, these are different kinds of backers who want different kinds of experiences. So they're not like $7.99 for an ebook. They're like happy to pay a higher price if they're going to have some interaction with you. They're going to have a paperback that's signed, those kind of things. So it doesn't really, because like Megan was saying, it's different audiences. It's not really as much of an issue as I would have thought at first.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Did you have kind of a philosophy about how you parceled out what you were offering across different tiers? Jennifer, let's start with you there.
Did I have a philosophy? I guess I'd heard or read somewhere that like the $60 tier should be really good stuff. And I don't remember where I heard that. It was like Facebook group or a class or something like that. So when I do a $60 tier, it's like it includes a class, it includes a digital copy and a physical copy if you're in the US. If not, sadly, I don't do the international shipping right now. But I really try to make sure that has like a lot of good stuff for that price point. And then the things below it tend to just be more like I would think of as regular book sales in that way. So that was just my way of doing it. But then, it kind of, like Megan was saying, is as you go up in value, it like nests with other stuff that you keep adding. So I think it depends on what your financial goals are. And then also understanding how much it costs you to sell a book and how that works with everything else.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that a little bit, I think the key part here to remember too is that you have to know your costs, right? Understanding your budget before you go in is incredibly important. And so figuring out what it's going to cost you to print. Are you going to do print on demand or are you going to do a print run? Are you going to, what are the shipping materials costs? What are the credit card fee costs? All these other costs have to be built into that Kickstarter tier that you don't have to do for just books on the ebook platforms or whatever, or bookstores. So I think backers understand that. So when you're coming up with your pricing and all your things, that's the pricing doesn't, it matters, but it doesn't matter as much as you think it does. They get that. So that's number one. And then number two, the kind of nice thing about nesting everything the way we're talking about is that you can have all these little digital add-ons that give your backers something exclusive for Kickstarter, like the wallpaper that I made, for example, or the coloring book page that I made. I haven't sent those out any other time, any other place. Like that's the only place they were able to get those. And for some backers, that's going to be awesome, right? So if you just have a lot of like digital included things, I don't want to say add-ons because that's different. So digitals that are included in your tiers, you can build up over the course of all the tiers what those are. And those digital items will, at very basically zero cost, right, add to that backer experience and give you that higher price value, if that makes sense.
Well, so just for an example, like quick example, I just did 5 small videos, mini vids talking about tropes in various movies that are only available to people at the $60 level and above, and they get the little code to watch those, and those are theirs. So those are like in addition, so like she's saying, you can like add other things on digitally. That's not more like things that you're shipping.
Yeah, that's cool. So that's sort of a lead into the next question I wanted to ask, and I'm anticipating the answer a little bit, but of all the people I've spoken to about Kickstarter, the thing that people said took much more time than they expected was fulfillment. I'm wondering if there was some part of it that was much more difficult, whether that was time-wise or effort-wise or psychically or whatever. What was much more difficult than you expected? Jennifer, let's start with you.
I think it was just like we talked about, figuring out who gets what when. And you can just use Kickstarter to do it. You don't have to use one of these other, what do we call associate programs or something? I'm trying to think of what.
Fulfillment providers or?
Yes, fulfillment providers, right. And I used BackerKit the first time because people had said, so a couple of people had said, oh, if you use BackerKit like the first time, then it's like makes it easier for subsequent campaigns. So I'm like, okay, I've gone through all this. I'm going to do at least one more. So I did. And it was pretty stressful for me figuring out all the stuff the first time. The second time, things have gone a lot smoother. Part of it, I think, is BackerKit has incredibly increased there. So that has been a very pleasant surprise for this second campaign. That said, it still takes a lot of time to do that. And I wouldn't ever, discount that and think that it's just kind of a thing you're just going to add on to all your extra work. You really need to know, okay, it takes time to like figure out how all this stuff gets to everybody and have it get there, dealing with shipping and those kind of things.
Yeah, I think there's a learning curve. And I think the first campaign, go in knowing that, right? Go in knowing that it's going to be challenging from campaign setup all the way through fulfillment. But don't expect that the campaign's going to be over. You're going to get all the money and then it's going to be, oh, easy peasy. No problem. No, it's not. It's not. In fact, don't bank that money until you get everything shipped out, because it's a new system. It's a new ecosystem. If you haven't done it before, and if you haven't ever worked, a warehouse, which most of us haven't, it's going to be challenging. But that's something that I think, Greta and I teach at the author wheel a lot, and we kind of go over and over again, is that when things are overwhelming, you have to give yourself some patience and some grace and break it down into small, easy to complete steps. So one step at a time, figure out the next thing you need to know, and then the next thing you need to know, and give yourself the time to do that. So don't expect that, you're going to be able to create the campaign page in a week and then launch the campaign and you're going to fund and you're going to make, $30,000 on day one. and then you're going to end and it's going to be all gravy from it. That's just not how it works. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of learning. So just be prepared for that.
It does seem like it might be useful for people who aren't familiar with Kickstarter to think of it as kind of like setting up an online store, like a more elaborate online store, because I think it makes sense to people that if they're setting up an online store, then they need to figure out the technology side of it. They need to figure out the fulfillment side of it. They need to figure out, how to reach the customers they want to reach, the readers they want to reach. And there are analogies to all those things for a Kickstarter. Thinking of it as, you're establishing a new outlet. And so all the little pieces and parts that go along with that need to be accommodated.
Yeah. And I think for authors who are interested in more direct sales, Kickstarter is a great first step because they do have the system set up. It's as complicated as it is, it's at least they guide you through the process to some extent. And there's information out there that you can use, templates you can copy. If you look at other people's campaigns, you can figure out what you're supposed to be doing for a lot of this stuff. And they walk you through step by step, piece by piece. So that's great. And then once you figure Kickstarter out, it's easier, I think, to do a direct sales, like if you wanted to start your own Shopify store or something like that. Because at that point now, you have inventory. Theoretically, you've probably purchased more books than you needed to ship out for your Kickstarter. So now you have inventory. Now you already have your copywriting. You have a lot of the pieces you need for a Shopify store to sell direct from home that you already built with the Kickstarter helping you along the way. I did it backwards, so learn from my mistakes. It's a much easier to start with Kickstarter and then move into Shopify, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting because I would have assumed it would be the other way around. I would have thought, like you cut your teeth on the online store and then you do Kickstarter. So it's interesting to hear that your learning was the opposite of that.
Well, and I think you can do it that way. I mean, I did, right? So if you already have a Shopify store, that's not to say don't use Kickstarter because it is still going to be different. It is still going to be a learning process. It's just what crosses over where. It's just that the nice thing with Kickstarter is that there's such an active community. And like I said, they do kind of walk you through the pieces to get you set up. And then you have all those pieces in place so you can more easily transfer them onto what would be an ad hoc or more ad hoc website system.
So I have to ask about the happy side of this as well. Was there any part of it that was easier or smoother than you expected? And Megan, I'm going to throw this back to you.
Sure. So I think that the easy part for me was actually running the campaign, like during the campaign process. I struggled. Well, I shouldn't say struggled, but it was a long setup process for me to get the campaign ready to go and to figure out what the tiers were and the pricing. And I was so nervous about all that, making sure like I was actually going to make a profit and not end up losing money on this whole thing. That pre-launch period was very stressful for me. The actual campaign, I already know how to send out newsletters to my list. I had a system in place. I pre-scheduled a lot of stuff. So during the actual campaign run, I was not as stressed as I thought I was going to be about it. It kind of just went. So there was still activity. There was still communication. There was still like, oh, I need to remember to do that or, promote this, cross promote with this other Kickstarter campaign or whatever. Like there were things that were happening and things I still needed to learn, but it just felt easier. And then the fulfillment process was all brand new as far as using BackerKit and stuff like that. So even though I knew like how much media mail shipping was going to cost and that kind of stuff, because I'd already been doing that with my Shopify store, it was still, the fulfillment was still like, okay, step at a time. I can do this. There we go. Okay. Yeah, got it. So, but yeah, that campaign period itself, the actual running of the campaign, because I'd built up all the skills I needed through, email marketing and other things over the course of my career, that part was fairly easy, relatively.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Jennifer, you had mentioned that you found that the BackerKit experience made that part smoother than you had worried it would be. Are there other things that ended up being smoother than you expected for you?
I would say, like Megan, I find the pre-launch pretty stressful. So I'm trying to figure all this out and wondering, like, is anybody going to want these things I'm coming up with? And that the campaign itself, once you have it going, it does kind of roll along, and that you're tending to it and things like that, but you aren't making like these big changes. You aren't doing big things. So it's more just kind of like emotionally like being there. But I think that part was like, oh yeah, in some ways, like when it's going, you're less actively working it as opposed to like the beginning and the back ends kind of thing. So yeah, I totally agree with her about that. So, and people are like supportive and nice, and that's kind of nice. That was like a nice thing to discover about it. I tend to keep changing genres when I do my thing, so I have to like keep meeting different groups, and it's always been nice that they're just a lot of good people out there.
That's lovely. So I wanted to ask both of you about just in general, how did you feel about the results of the campaigns you've run? Did it deliver what you were looking for? Are there any major changes you would make the next time you ran one? And Megan, I'm going to start with you.
So I think like I said, the biggest change for this next one is that I'm going to simplify the tiers a little bit and not offer a cocktail class. Learn that one.
I would sign up for a cocktail if only I had known.
Yeah. And so I think that's learning from what worked on the first campaign and then applying that to the next one. So this one is going to be very much more focused on the product itself, which is the hardback, making it really beautiful, getting enough backers to afford the print runs. So that's going to be the key on that one. But for me, that first fiction campaign was successful because I did learn that stuff, because I now know, or feel like I know at least better, what I'm doing, how to do it right, what my audience is looking for, what the audience on Kickstarter in general is looking for. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. It's the first one's going to be tough. I'm hoping the second one is less tough.
And Jennifer, what's your thought on that?
I agree with all the things she said, and I'm just like really thinking about going forward, making sure to build some rest time in, because it's like when you finish, then you're like, oh, you have all these other things to do, and then you're thinking about the next one, but also realizing, oh, I need to take a break. And there are people who can run like many close together, but I'm probably not that person. And just to kind of honor the way that how it works and not feel like, oh, just because this person did it this way, I have to do it that way. I think Kickstarter is very much a great platform to like take a little bit of this, take a little bit of that, and work out what thing works best for you. But I don't think you have to like follow so much of a set pattern and knock yourself out.
I actually like that a lot. I think expanding on that a little bit, the thing I learned from my nonfiction campaign, which we're finally almost completely fulfilled with because we had to make some courses, is that don't expect you can maintain your standard schedule on your creation of stuff when you're trying to fulfill or when you're trying to do these Kickstarters. It is not, you can't stay at that same level and then add something on top. That just, it stresses you out. Like that's kind of where I'm at right now for the nonfiction stuff. So making sure that you go, okay, this is now a component of the process. And so some of the other things that you normally do are probably going to slow down. And that's okay. And you need to be able to breathe. So I actually wrote recently in my notebook, pause, breathe, recover. My current mantra is pause, breathe, recover.
It could be PBR, except that's already Pabst Blue Ribbon, right?
Yeah.
You could use a PBR to PBR.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, I love any suggestion that a guest ever makes in support of self-care and reasonability and taking care of yourself as well as taking care of your business. So thank you so much to both of you. And I want to give both of you a moment to share where people can find out more about you and everything you do online. And Megan, let's start with you.
All right. So my fiction website is meganhaskell.com. All of my books are available there in signed paperback as well as ebook. And I have a few titles that have been done in audio at this point as well. So that's all there. They are also available wide. So that's my books. For the nonfiction side of my life, you can visit authorwheel.com and learn what we're doing there. And then I also have started recently writing a new newsletter called Clarify, Simplify, Implement on Substack. And it's pretty self-descriptive. Yes. It's all my thoughts on writing and publishing from the standpoint of productivity and strategy and how to have a sustainable life.
Perfect. Jen, how about you?
You can find all my stuff at my website, www.jenniferhilt.com. And I've got my nonfiction there. And then there's a little bit of my fiction too, if you'd like to take a look. And like Megan, I have a Substack going to Trope Talk and YouTube channel. So you can find me around doing that stuff. And I really love Megan's Substack.
Well, I was going to say, I really love yours too. So we can just all be happy together.
Whenever your thing comes, I'm like, oh God, I needed to hear that like right now.
I love it when you guys do the promotional work for me. So thank you both so much. This was a great conversation.
Thanks, Mandy.
Thank you for having us.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Megan and Jennifer. Have you done a Kickstarter? And if yes, are there any tips you can share with your fellow authors? Have you thought about doing a Kickstarter, and did our conversation make you more or less likely to take the plunge? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Just leave a comment on YouTube and please subscribe while you're there. And if you'd like another perspective on Kickstarter, check out episode 56, Crowdfunding for Authors with Joshua Esso. That was from late 2020, but a lot of Joshua's insights still hold true. And if you got value from this episode and were thinking, I wish I could buy Matty a cup of coffee, you can do that. Scroll to the bottom of any page at theindieauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee to make a small contribution via PayPal or Stripe. Until next time, here's wishing you favorable winds and smooth sailing on your creative voyage.